Good morning. As a reminder, the purpose of this video is to demonstrate what a how-to video can look like. So more particularly, what a field-sourced how-to video could look like. So don't get too caught up on the particulars, but rather focus on how you might be able to create a how-to video like this one. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to inspect a Liferaft installation. The two things we're most concerned about with a Liferaft installation is that in an emergency situation, the Liferaft will be able to float free and deploy automatically. So the first thing to consider is that Liferafts have to be securely installed on the vessel so that they don't inadvertently deploy or get lost in the storms, those sorts of things. But yet they also need to be able to float free in case of an emergency. And so that functionality is facilitated with a hydrostatic release. So this is a typical Liferaft installation. It's secured to the vessel by a wire harness that is in turn secured down here in the frame. And there's a hook that can be used to manually deploy the Liferaft by basically slipping the ring off of the pelican hook, and the hook releases, and that releases the wiring harness. But obviously that's not going to work in an emergency situation when there's nobody to manually deploy it, and that's where the hydrostatic release comes in. The function of a hydrostatic release is to release the harness and so the Liferaft can float free of the vessel. And it does that by a pressure switch and that is acted upon by water pressure. So when the vessel is sinking and this device gets basically 5 to 15 feet below the surface, there's a pressure actuator that releases a blade that cuts this line. When the line is cut, the harness is released and the Liferaft can float free. So we talked about how the hydrostatic release allows the Liferaft to float free of the vessel. But it's important to remember that the Liferaft remains secured to the vessel via a painter line. And the reason that is because to deploy a Liferaft so that it inflates, you have to pull on this line here. This goes into the Liferaft, and by tugging on it, it releases a CO2 cylinder that inflates the Liferaft. Normally, if you're manually deploying it, you would throw the Liferaft over the side, then you would pull on this line and inflate it. But in an automatic situation, the Liferaft capsule floats to the surface, and as it does that, it pulls on this line, and there's enough tension that will automatically deploy it and inflate it. So as I said, once the Liferaft floats free of the vessel, it is still secured to the vessel by way of a painter. The purpose of the painter is to provide enough tension to pull the lanyard that inflates the Liferaft. But yet when the Liferaft inflates, you want it to be able to break free from the vessel, and the device that does that is called a weak link. So after you inspect the hydrostatic release, you want to be able to inspect the weak link to ensure that it is secured to the vessel and not to the hydrostatic release or some other part. So in this case, if you look, you can see that this red line passes around the eyelet here and is secured to the vessel. Now what we have here is a bad example, and it's unfortunately it's seen pretty regularly where they've installed the device upside down. So if you notice, the painter is attached to the weak link correctly, but the weak link is attached to the bridle. And so what will happen when the hydrostatic release actuates, this line floats free and the Liferaft and the painter drift off and never inflate. So this is a newer type of hydrostatic release. It's combined with the weak link, and it makes it pretty simple to install. It tells you right away this is what attaches to the vessel. this is where the painter line goes through. And when you know that, and you know that this is where the Liferaft harness attaches to, then there's pretty much one way to do it. So it makes it a lot easier for vessel crews to install these things correctly. So again, this is a hydrostatic release and weak link configured in the same system. So today we talked about the importance of a Liferaft being able to float free and deploy automatically in emergency situations. And we talked about the two pieces of hardware that are critical for making that happen: the hydrostatic release and the weak link. So I found best practices, if you know what the function those devices serve, which is one, to release the harness in the case of the hydrostatic release, and two, in the case of the weak link, to allow the Liferaft to deploy and yet break free from the vessel once it's inflated, then you can inspect a particular installation and determine if it's set up to do those two things.